In the Celebrate Kids podcast, especially in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, we've talked a lot about artificial intelligence. And with school starting back up, it's inevitable that many schools are going to begin either teaching kids how to use this or maybe even kind of shunning it away from the classroom. And for some of us, maybe like myself, we're wrestling with how we can maybe use artificial intelligence to make our jobs easier or to help us do more things. But also we're a little bit fearful for what it could mean for our kids. So today, we're going to turn to Dr. Kathy for some insight on how we can train not only our minds, but also our kids' hearts as they look at a world that embraces artificial intelligence, especially in school.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, Walla Walla High School in Washington State is integrating AI, artificial intelligence, chatbots. These are chatbots like ChatGPT that many of us kind of maybe have used or we've maybe read about on the internet. They're integrating these different tools into their curriculum, aiming to equip students kind of for the digital age while navigating some challenges of misinformation and privacy. Educators say they recognize the potential benefits of using chatbots for lesson planning and student learning, and they're now emphasizing the need for responsible usage and critical thinking inside of this sphere. So, Dr. Kathy, I think it's kind of interesting that we're using artificial intelligence to help us understand misinformation inside of digital spheres. It just feels like a recycled triangle. We just keep going around and around with this. But, rather than kind of jumping into this bandwagon, I feel like there's almost some muscles that we need to build outside of artificial intelligence that then can help us understand how we should use artificial intelligence. What skills do you believe are really important for young people to develop to help them build discernment in this sphere?
It's very interesting. If we're going to use If most of what we use are books and papers and TED Talks and DVDs, et cetera, then let's start there, right? And let's make sure that our kids can discern the things that are normal and the things that they have lots of experiences with. It's really a good point. And then that skill of discernment can then be passed on to things like artificial intelligence. And was this a good use of it? Was this a cheating, inappropriate use of it, et cetera? Obviously, truth versus lie. And not just true versus not true, but a little bit of lie, right? Like it's easier to see a big lie and notice it and go, shame on you. But we got to make sure kids know a little lie. A little bit of exaggeration is still wrong, right? So I think those are important things to maybe consider. I am absolutely convinced we've got to help our kids with eye contact. So if we're talking discernment with a person, discernment with somebody who's on a TV on debate, is it on TV in a debate? Does your kid know how to watch that person's behavior, even if you don't have the volume on the TV, and figure out what was going on there? If you're watching a TED Talk, if you're watching a TV show or a movie, or if you're people watching at the mall or the church lobby, can your kids figure out from looking at body language who's positive, who's negative, who's critical, who's optimistic, who's self-centered and selfish versus somebody who's other-centered? I think it's really fun to teach children to watch TV with no volume to figure out who's in charge of the conversation. Because that's how you figure out who the bully is and who the one is that's taking a lead. So discernment of the people. Is there anything in their eyes that looks off to you? And if you're a believer, again, teaching them about the check in the Holy Spirit. Like there are often times when I'm out and about and there will be a check in my spirit where I need to walk away from that particular person, or I need to stop reading this magazine article or whatever. Do we teach that to our kids? So very, very interesting.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I do really think that it's incredibly interesting. I live in this world. I would call it maybe an artificial intelligent world, but I don't know if that's really a great way to describe it, especially because I think that for my kids, I really encourage kind of this idea of imaginative play. for our kids, they really play outside and they play imaginary games, right? They play against imaginary bad guys. They have imaginary things that they go and attack the imaginary bad guys with. And I love that. I just love that they're in this world. They're world building and they're kind of engaging this world that they're building. But I worry a little bit when we think of kind of training kids to engage this artificially intelligent world as if it's really real. Does doing this kind of challenge kids? How can kind of parents build strong grounding in reality so that these worlds that other people are building for them don't kind of become this world that they kind of stake their identity or maybe even stake their understanding of how they approach or engage in a world that's really artificially driven to guide them to do something, right? They want them to buy the product. They want them to, spend more time on this digital media. They want them to do, people that build artificial intelligence want kids to do something. How can we build for our kids a strong grounding in actual reality so they're not led astray by artificial reality?
Wow. Now that'll preach. That's a great question. I need to think about it more. The first thing that comes to mind is we got to spend time with our kids. Our reality is, dad's working really hard and that's why we're eating dinner at 6:30 this week. Can't get home until then because his boss isn't well and there's this important project. So are we honest and do we talk about reality and do we talk about how the decisions we make for ourselves also influence other people and that our decisions are not often our own to make, but are influenced by the reality in which we live, and that's finance and weather and people and opportunities and just so many things. Yeah, reality. Are we with them? Do we talk about what's true? Do they understand fairy tales? I love that your kids play imaginatively outside. Imagination is a genius quality. There is evidence that fewer and fewer kids are able to go to the housekeeping corner, as an example, in a preschool and pretend to play house. Most of us who are older, we were mom and dad and we went to work and we had a crying baby and we made, pizza for dinner or whatever. And we have children today who cannot imagine. They're actually stuck in reality in a very negative place because they haven't been exposed to outside of the box living, which is really tragic. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I think, could I read a fairy tale and see what is fake and what is real? And could I talk about what is similar to our reality and what is totally off grid? Those kinds of things matter. And then what if I surprised you with this idea? I don't know, Wayne, if you've ever heard me say this. We cannot call men and women who lived in biblical times characters. Cinderella is a character. Little Red Riding Hood is a character. Penelope is the main character in a little storybook that I read this morning. But Jesus is a person, and Esther is a person, and Paul is a person, and Moses is a person, and they lived in biblical times, and they changed the world. So I wonder if we're just flipping with words sometimes, and that's confusing for kids.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I do kind of think through that a lot myself, honestly. I'm just going to kind of be honest and say that those things kind of run through my mind. Do I call it a Bible story or is it like Bible history?
Yes.
And understanding it, right? And all of that kind of leads to this fact that I really do believe that we're in a strong postmodern mood with artificial intelligence. Essentially, we're trying to break down any sense of kind of a larger story or a larger order and really just focus on kind of the here and now. How do you think that parents can kind of step in and guide our kids to have a sense of awe and wonder, especially in a world that really works to, I would say, kind of undo creativity by outsourcing creativity to what's called generative artificial intelligence or generative AI?
Wow, that's fascinating. Because awe and wonder is essential. Actually, wonder is another genius qualities. Our colleague, Melissa Hannigan, has written a brilliant book called Inconvenient Parenting about 12 traits that God instills in us that we need to keep alive in our children according to the way that we parent. And the original research that generated this list of 12 qualities was based on the geniuses of all time. What caused a genius to be a genius versus somebody who was simply good in school. And wonder is one of them. So how do we develop wonder? We slow down. We go outside. We stare at the sky and we go, I wonder how far it goes. Wonder is both a verb and an emotional response. And you know what? In church and in school, we don't have time for emotional responses. Turn the page, hurry, here's another book. Here's another verse to learn, versus to slow down and to take the time to go, wow, God is amazing. Or the sky just goes forever and ever. How high can grasshoppers hop? I don't like them, and I think I'm far enough away from them. And then lo and behold, they jump still into my personal space. How far can they jump? We've got to be asking, and that's a funny big question. But we don't always have to ask serious questions about, how many more people need to, be born before we're going to be. No, but wonder and awe, to slow down, to go outside, to ask the questions, to let our kids wonder about things and not always feed them a quick answer with Google. Google.com and Siri. There's a good use of those things. Please understand. I use it. Don't call Siri a her or a him, and get rid of the Australian hunk of an accent voice you have. Because Siri is a computer liberally programmed by people who don't know you, love you, or know or love your God. And there are times when using it's totally appropriate, but our kids haven't wrestled with ideas and figured out how to problem solve as well as maybe in the old days, because they just Google it. And there's no wonder there. So slow down and let them ask different questions. And we need to do it too.
It's a little bit funny that in all the things we talked about here today, there's one passage of scripture that comes out of Ecclesiastes 2 that I found ringing in my mind. And it comes from Ecclesiastes 2, beginning at verse 24. And this is what's written. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. Now, I realize that these verses kind of ringing in my mind as we talk about artificial intelligence might show you a little bit of what goes through my mind. But there's something about the reality of how God has designed us to find satisfaction in the work that we do, to find enjoyment in the process of writing, in working to solve a problem or an equation. While a computer can do it for us, there's something about the way that God has designed us to be people who image Him, to find solutions to problems, to be people that bring about restoration in a world that's broken, and not to simply be people who sit back and put their feet up on their desk and let a computer figure things out. I think the words and the wisdom that Dr. Kathy has given us today are really helpful to help us build into our kids wisdom and knowledge, to know when they should use tools like artificial intelligence to aid them in bringing restoration to the world, but not to make them people who just seemingly meaninglessly chase after riches or chase after the solution of problems without finding satisfaction and imaging God in being people who redeem and restore the world. And I hope that's an encouragement for you as you work with your kids. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this, our daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name's Wayne Stender, and I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.